Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a guest we haven't had on for a while. He went kind of on hiatus for a while, plus I've had an embarrassment of bookings. But this guy, smart guy, brilliant. He was a CEO of a tech company that he sold for a lot of money. Then in 2007, he started market-ticker.org. Brilliant analyst on not just financial stuff, but geopolitical stuff as well. So I'm happy to have him back on after a long time not being on. We're talking about Karl Denninger, market-ticker.org. Karl Denninger, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg.
I wanted to talk something you said a while ago, and it just was one of those Helen Keller water moments. And you said, listen, we never hit the wall. We always get to the point where we're almost going to hit the wall, and somebody says, "Oop, I'm out." Boom. And that's what happened in the housing crisis. You said we could have lasted until 2010 or so. And I was like, wow, it's brilliant. I mean, it's really unbelievable. So my question to you, just to start this off, are we getting close to the wall? Or are we getting close to a time where somebody is saying, "Whoops, I'm out"?
Yeah, and the clear fiscal period where that comes is in 2024 with Medicare. Everybody knows that that date is there. Everybody knows that that's when essentially the gig is up in terms of how Medicare is currently funded. So the short-term answer to what Congress could do with that when they run out of their bonds and they're not taking enough money is to pass a one-sentence law that says that Medicare's deficit can just go on the federal budget. Now, under current law, they can't do that, but that would be the one-sentence thing they could do. The problem with doing that is it explodes the budget deficit, and exactly what the market's reaction to that would be is unknown. So there is a hard date out there, and it's in 2024. And whether or not somebody will throw up all over it before we get there is the valid question. And I suspect the answer to that's yes.
Federal Reserve, we got a great economy, and some people are saying that listen, the Fed's on the glide path now to start cutting rates. And they were raising rates ever since Donald Trump got into office, and actually once or twice before Obama left, but they never really fixed it. But they raised them, 7 times in the first 2.5 years Trump was in office, and now they're in a rate cutting mode. It looks like the markets want this. They've signaled they're going to do this. What gives? We have a great economy, and yet they're cutting rates.
Do we have a great economy? For
Well,
who?
that's what they say.
Well, for who? I mean, that's, that you have a job sounds fantastic. And if you look at the unemployment statistics, they look really good, right? But look at the cost of living in things that you actually have to buy. There was a very interesting study that NPR did. They took common things sold at Walmart and built their own inflation basket. And they said, well, the real number is about, 3%, which is not too far off the official number, right? Problem was there were all sorts of things in there that were up in cost 20%, 30%, numbers like this. And then there's ones that are down, but the ones that are down are things like televisions. Well, how many televisions do you actually need? So you have to look at things with a somewhat of a jaundiced eye with regards to the official statistics, because whether or not the economy is great is not just based upon unemployment. It's based upon things like, if your car broke tomorrow and you needed to come up with $500, could you do it? And the answer to that for a large percentage of the American population is no.
Inflation is more of an indicator of how well people are doing, is what you're saying.
Well, inflation is kind of a funny thing because numerically, the way it's done today is a fraud, and it feeds back into GDP, and that's a fraud as well for the same reason. If you're going to measure something, you have to measure it in an invariant unit. So if I'm going to tell you that something is 12 inches long, we have to have a definition of what an inch is. And that definition cannot change, because if it does, then an inch is not an inch. And yet we measure GDP in dollars, but a dollar is not a dollar in terms of the amount of currency and credit circulating in the economy. So the entire premise that we have this fabulous economy and we have this growth, to a large degree, it's a chimera. And it's one of the things that I pointed out back when I wrote Leverage, and I've been raising a stink about for a long time. But as long as you can get people to believe that everything is wonderful, and so they go out and they buy stocks, and they're willing to put their money in government debt, and the government can sell those bonds to somebody. Which, by the way, in a very low interest rate environment, those are not investments. You're not buying them for the interest coupon. You're buying them with the belief that before that time period expires, the government will lower rates further. And as a result, you'll be able to sell them at a capital gain to somebody else. And that's essentially what the bond market has become. It's become a speculative vehicle, which turns the entire premise of the capital structure on its head.
You think the Fed is do you think the Fed is cutting rates? Is if the economy, well, they say, the administration says, every administration says when they're in power, especially coming to the election, the economy is great. But why do you think what's the real reason behind their cutting rates? I mean, are they in a tough situation? I mean, they try to raise rates, and the market sold off, according to John Williams, shadowstats.com. The market sold off in the fall of last year, and they had to say, well, we're going to stop doing that. So what's up?
Well, okay, the market sold off last year, but in percentage terms, from where it came from 2009, it didn't sell off much at all. So we have to be a little careful with describing that kind of thing. The truth is, though, that compound growth in asset prices is the Fed's mandate. That's the true mandate these days. It also happens to be the one that we have president that essentially looks at it as a referendum on his presidency. So the problem with doing this, though, is that when everything is financed, it all comes down to what is the rate of interest. Okay, the problem for the economy as a whole is that just because the government has, 10-year treasuries at 175 or something like this, or, wherever it ends up, or if they continue to cut rates, that the overnight rate is close to zero, what's your credit card interest look like?
Yeah. What's the inflation like?
Well, and see, here's the thing.
John Williams says the real inflation rate is somewhere between 9 and 10%. If you compile it the way they did it, when an inch was an inch, if you compile it the way they did it in 1980, we're at 8 or 9% nationally. That's what he says. Isn't that what you're talking about? That people don't have any money and they're getting squeezed?
I don't know that I necessarily buy his methodology, but what I do know is that when I look in the CPI tables, there are figures in there and weightings that are laughable compared to reality. And if you take that and the hedonic adjustment back out, and just one example, supposedly a half-ton pickup truck, okay, motor vehicles, has 146%, I believe, of base year is supposedly their price today. All right, well, if you look at a half-ton pickup truck in the base year, it cost about $8,000. So tell me where I can buy a half-ton pickup truck for 12 grand.
Not a new one.
Well, but the CPI number says I can. All right, so obviously I can't. So the numbers are bogus. Does it matter whether Williams' recreation is accurate? No. All that matters is that what we're being fed is a lie.
Yeah. It's so what you can agree on, whether it's 8 or 9% or 12%, or Catherine Austin Fitz says some areas are much higher. It's very uneven. It's certain areas are 14, 15%, like San Francisco is unbelievably high. And she's around in Tennessee where she is. She says it's 8 or 9%. The idea is it's not 2%.
Right, but the thing is there's places where it's negative too. I mean, for example, if you need a new television, okay, you can't eat a television.
Yeah. TVs are cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I bought a new TV, and I thought, wow, I got a deal. It was like $459 50-inch TV, and now you can get a 60-inch TV for about the same amount of money.
Right. So it's very uneven, but again, what it really comes down to is the cost of the things you need to buy. Okay, because when you get down to it, you have to have food, you have to have a place to live, you have to have basic utilities, electricity, water, sewer, garbage pickup, whatever. Even if you're on a well, you have to have your septic tank pumped every couple of years. So I mean, there's these essential goods and services. If you just go and look at those and how that factors into things, and then government permits and fees along with taxes. Property tax is a big one, and everybody pays it. If you are renting somewhere, you pay it in your rent. If you own a house, you're paying it, directly to the county, and those taxes are only going one direction.
Yeah, you're in Florida right now. In Florida, I know you're in Florida. You're thinking So what is this? What is this? What's your snapshot of the economy now? Then, what do you think we are right now? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it indifferent? Is it good for some and terrible for most? Or
I think
I
it's
don't know.
very good for people in the top couple percent. It's moderately okay for people in the top 10. It's terrible for people that are further down the line. And the real problem isn't so much that it's good or bad or terrible for any particular group. It's that the entire thing is running on borrowed funds. In other words, the day of you going to work and earning something and then saving your economic surplus, that's gone.
Explain.
You don't have an economic surplus. So this is, you look at the statistics, they say that the majority of the American population couldn't manage to come up with $400.
Yeah.
So you tell me how you can have a great economy if the majority of the people in this country, if their transmission blew up on their car tomorrow, they couldn't come up with $400.
Mm-mm-mm. So you think that is the real where the real money hits the road is the creeping and growing expenses, and wages aren't rising as fast as expenses. I mean, that's
Well, it's
for
that
most
we have
people.
extended, yeah, we've extended credit to be the way that everything is bought. You don't even pay cash for a phone anymore.
Yeah. What's the answer?
Well, the
What should
answer
people
is
do?
that the people that are over levered have to cut it out. But the biggest issue isn't in the private economy. It's that the federal government, as of the last monthly Treasury statement, we got one more month to go in the fiscal year. They're running approximately 25% fiscal deficit. They took in $3 trillion in taxes. They spent $4 trillion. Well, that's 33%. That's crazy.
How long can that go on for?
Right up until the market says no.
Do you think so? You say the wall is 2024, and I guess the bigger the problem, the farther away you get from the wall before somebody says, "I'm out." I mean, can you?
Yeah, well, you don't know when it's going to happen, but the thing is, if you start having an issue with the ability to cover healthcare within the broader economy, you're talking about tens of millions of Americans that suddenly find themselves faced with the prospect of either buying food or buying what they need, and if they don't, if they go for the food, they die anyway. I mean, that's a terrible choice. And yet, there is a way to fix it, and that is to defang the medical monopolies and that monster. But if you do that, we have an instant huge recession because over the last 10 years, we put 4 or 5 million people to work that never provide a single second of care to a single person. Their entire purpose in life is ripping people off in the medical industry.
Mm-mm-mm. Do you think that the economy? Some people say that there's a crash imminent. I mean, some of the mainstream media, some of the people not in the mainstream media say the economy's sick. They say different versions of what you say. You say it so eloquently, and you have a different take on it. But it all ends up with the things aren't as good as you think they are, and things are not as stable as you think they are. Do you think this holds together through 2020, or do you think it blows up?
Well, that's a very difficult call. Bush, Bush famously, as along with Greenspan, said there was going to be no recession, everything was going to be fine, right? 2007.
Yeah. Okay.
And they all thought that would, that Bush at least thought that he'd certainly get through 2008 in the election, and we have Barack Obama for 8 years as a result of him being wrong about that, in no small part. So although I've made the argument before that Bernanke essentially elected Obama on his own by pulling system liquidity into the maw and the Lehman collapse, he did it on purpose.
And Trump saying that the enemy, that the Fed is his enemy, and they should be cutting rates, and they did raise rates a ton. I mean, you look at it on a chart, and Obama in 15 and 16 they raised rates a quarter, and with Trump, boom, 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 and then they started burning cash. According to Jim Rickards, he says, if Bernanke is a helicopter dropping money out, Jay Powell is a guy with a shovel shoveling cash into a blast furnace. So I mean, so you don't know if they can. So you don't know. I mean, that's a scary prognosis that somebody like you doesn't know whether we can make it past 2020 or not.
Well, the odds are against, and it's just simply because there's so many people who would like to see it go kaboom for political purposes, and we have the same situation that comes up every 4 years. All right, I mean this is This is not news. All right, we have a presidential election every 4 years. Each party would love to win. The other party, of course, doesn't want to lose. And and if one of them can throw a few gas bombs around and blow something up, well, why wouldn't they? Especially if they don't get tagged for it. So, when this has happened in the past, the people who were responsible for it didn't get tagged. Okay, the tech wreck, in 1999, it was building. It was clearly going to blow up. Well, in 2000, it did blow up. And then you had this, same thing happened in 2008 with the housing crash, and all the way into the middle of it, right up until Lehman detonated. Everybody was, oh no, there's not going to be a recession. There's not going to be a problem. Everything's fine. Subprime is contained. We'll do what we have to do. We can control this. It's okay.
Boom.
How'd that work out for you?
It exploded.
Well, yeah, and it will again. But that's what it comes down to is this: every night somebody wakes up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, thinks they're going to be broke in the morning. Someone else wakes up in the middle of the night with a great big you-know-what, thinking they're going to be rich in the morning. Right? As long as there's some balance between that, everything is more or less stable. It's when everyone wakes up in the cold sweat and nobody wakes up with the heart on.
Wow. And that's the wall. That's what happens before we get to the wall. Somebody says, I'm bailing.
Yeah, you'll never hit it. It's just when sentiment shifts, it tends to happen very rapidly.
Well, I thought of you because I've been keeping track of these big money managers. Like Ray Dalio wrote a long thing at the end. Buy gold. Did I tell you to buy gold? And then, you have the guy Templeton, Mobius. He started Templeton Funds. He gets asked this question on I think, Bloomberg and says, well, what about this gold thing? Oh, you got to buy gold. Yeah, you got to buy it at any level. That's what he said. I'm thinking, holy shit. Sorry, cussed. But I'm not going to cut that out. I'm sorry. Holy, you know what. Anyway, and then, other people, I mean, the head of BlackRock, the CIO of Chief Investment Officer, you got to buy things that are real. Like gold. Did I tell you gold? And I'm thinking, what are these people? This is 200 and something, $50 billion of investment just with these three guys. What's going on?
Well, it's there's everyone sees the wall. Everyone sees the problem. You can pull, the monthly Treasury statements. They're public. Okay, go pull it up on a computer and read it. It's a balance sheet. I mean, it's if you want to look at it as what it is, it's the general ledger of the federal government. I don't know how much more accurate.
Not looking good.
And no, it's terrible. And the thing is that everyone knows it's terrible. It's been terrible for a long time. It was terrible when Obama was president. It's terrible now. It hasn't changed. Congress has done nothing to resolve any of the underlying issues. You've got crazy people like the Squad who want to put another, $30 trillion on the debt because we can't burn any fossil fuels. We're all going to die in 12 years unless we, completely get rid of CO2. Never mind the fact that we have something on the order of 1 billion people in the world today that have no electricity in their homes. All right. If you look at like South Africa, for example, there's about half of the population that has no electricity. Now, if you think those people are going to continue to live in straw huts for the rest of their natural lives and just let us go on lollygagging around, you got rocks in your head. That's not going to happen. And yet, we're 330 million little people here. And oh, by the way, our CO2 emissions are back to where they were in approximately the 1980s. And the reason is fracking has made natural gas so cheap.
Yeah.
And gas on a BTU per BTU basis puts about half as much CO2 into the atmosphere as does coal. So we did this strictly on economics. It's much cheaper to burn natural gas than it is to burn coal. Therefore, we burn the natural gas. We make half as much CO2. And even though we have far more people in the United States than we did in the 1980s, we're producing less emissions. Okay.
And you think that, all this stuff is just, I guess, what straw is going to break the camel's back? I mean, like Jim Rickard says, there's going to be a snowflake moment with the last snowflake hits the pile of snow and you have an avalanche that wipes out the village below. You just don't know when the last straw or last snowflake is going to be piled on.
Right. And I see the fiscal calamity that is in process now. I see the political calamity. You have things like this Kavanaugh nonsense that are going on right now. You have a Supreme Court that is going to have another vacancy within the next year. I would give that a 95% probability.
And that is this why
And
they're smearing him so hard? I mean, they're going to get a woman the next time. It's probably Barrett.
they're going to
Uh,
get Barrett. Yeah, they're going to get
or
Barrett.
were they going
It's
to
going to
say
be
she
Barrett.
was involved and she was the woman in the gang rape? I mean, which she hasn't been. Stupid. I mean, what are they going to do with her?
Well, you can't do it. You can't. That's the problem they have is they know Barrett's up next. Okay, Barrett is a hardcore Catholic conservative, um, and Ginsburg. I mean, she should have retired. She took the gambit that Hillary was going to win. Basically,
Yeah,
that was her gambit, and she'd be able to retire with a Democratic president and get another liberal justice on the court. Now, the court is not supposed to be political, but Ginsburg has epitomized politicization of the Supreme Court, much more than any other justice in the history of the court in the last 50 years. And yet, everybody canonizes this woman on the left because she votes the way they want her to vote. Well, guess what? She's not going to be around much longer. I don't care whether you like her or hate her or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. You don't have multiple recurring instances of cancer in somebody of that age and manage to get away with it forever. It just doesn't happen. And they kept coming back and saying, "Oh, there's no more cancer." And then 2 months later, "Oh, wait a minute, we had to go back in there, cut another piece of it out of her." Excuse me? You're lying. Okay. So how long is it before it's one too many? And the odds do not favor her making it through the end of next year.
yeah, yeah. And that they couldn't. Somebody brought this up. I did actually. I was telling my wife this. To say, they had to do. They couldn't get gay marriage in California, liberal California. It would come down 60-40. No, and yet they got it through the Supreme Court. And they're looking at so all the crazy stuff you watched. I know you probably did. You watched it. I watched every debate. It's nuts, including the 7-hour CNN extravaganza on how we're
Yeah.
going to kibosh the economy by destroying all the fossil fuels and not eating. Anyway, if they can't get that stuff through, so all they got is the court system. I mean,
Well,
that's their big
yeah,
ploy. Is it not? Isn't that what they're at the specter of what they're losing?
yeah, and one of the problems you have right now is that they've gone so far with the Ninth Circus, which has been a joke for a long time. But they went too far this time because this immigration thing with asylum regulations, the Ninth Circuit Court issued national injunction, which, by the way, no circuit court has the authority to do
Right.
because it's outside their jurisdiction. Okay, they can't do that. And yet they've been doing it continually now for 10, 15 years and getting away with it. And finally, one of these goes up into the Supreme Court just on a writ for to kill the injunction. And the Supreme Court not only killed the national injunction, it forbid any of the circuit courts from reimposing it until the case is finally disposed of, whether it comes up to the Supreme Court or otherwise. Well, the brevity of that opinion,
Wow.
one
That's
paragraph. You read that and you go, "Hey, wait a minute! This was a belt to the back of the neck."
yeah. Yeah. So Trump's going to have his way probably throughout. And listen, it's costing us a ton of money. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if you have this in your area, but they put this up with One American News where they have a running total of how much illegal immigration costs. I mean, it's up to 130, 40, 50, 60. I don't know what it is. 100 plus $100 billion a year for this nuttiness. And they don't want
It's not just the money. In one county in Maryland, over the last couple of months, there have been 9 rapes
Oh,
from illegal invaders. The last one was the victim was a 6-year-old girl.
oh, Lord.
All right, and this is because we won't throw these people out of the United States.
I know. And so we got sheriffs in North Carolina that will not, honor ICE detainers. And the governor, when they try to push this through, there's a Democrat governor and a Republican House, and when a House and Senate, and when they pushed this bill through, they vetoed the bill. And they couldn't override it, and they said you can't make them do it. This is Governor Cooper, we're going to protect the illegal alien above the citizen, which is unbelievable. I mean, it's really quite unbelievable. In all, when you take a look at this geopolitical turmoil and the Antifa-like attacks on people, and you look at how shaky the economy is, wrapping up, where do you think we are right now? What should people do?
Well, I think right now you need to pay very close attention to keep your friends close, your enemies closer. You need to be looking at what sort of exposure do you have if everything goes down the toilet, and we don't just have an economic calamity, we have a civil order calamity because the people on the left, they want that. We all have this big thing with the news cycle with these mass shootings. There's just one example. But you now have two candidates for president. Unfortunately, they're two that are polling 1%. All right, there's zero chance of actually being elected. We have two of them that have literally said they will start a civil war if they are president of the United States. They're willing to kill 15 million Americans, murder them if they don't get their way on guns. I don't know if anybody understands exactly how dangerous that sort of a statement is. Now, if something like that was to come out of Biden's mouth or Bernie Sanders,
Biden did say he wanted to buy back AR-15s, which they never owed him in the first place.
On
anyway.
a voluntary basis, okay? But you've got Beto and Kamala who have both said they will literally come and take them.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got 10% of the people who own them that really believe the Second Amendment means what it says, you've now got 1.5 million Americans that are going to shoot cops.
Yeah.
And they're not going to wait until they come to the door. They're going to go hunting. Right? Yeah. That's a civil war. That's the kind of thing that's going on over in Yemen right now.
So things could. So you're saying that it's not just a financial calamity that could happen. It's a civil order calamity could happen.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And here's. I mean, you look at what just happened in Saudi Arabia, right? You had 10 drones, or cruise missiles or whatever. They blew up some stuff. How hard would it be for somebody who got dedicated to do something like that to the infrastructure in this country and cripple some of our cities and things like this? And by the way, how long would civil order persist if you had something like that happen to a city such as Chicago and the official estimate was, well, it'll be 2 or 3 months before the power comes back on?
Whew. Yeah. Grim picture. So
I don't want to see stuff like this, but you have politicians that are making noises that they're going to actually try to impose this sort of stuff. Now, I don't take a lot of threat from it from someone like Beto O'Rourke. Kamala Harris is a little more concerning because she's an actual senator. All right. But neither of those two are going to be president of the United States. You hear something like that come out of Pocahontas, and we got a different game.
So protect yourself from the downside, both financially and civil order-wise, is what you're saying.
And think about, if you're in a position where you're dependent on the medical industry right now, or if you're in debt and you can't make it 3 to 6 months without your job and without an income, you got a big problem, and you need to do something about it.
I will leave it at that. That to me just says you need to buy food and keep your cars filled up. And some other stuff is in medicine. I mean that's the darkest of dark sides, is to have to make it on your own and have complete breakdown of the American society. And you're saying that's a possibility.
Yeah, I don't think it's a very high probability, but that's only because the people who are doing it right now are the fruit and nut brigade on the left. But the last debate, what got the biggest applause? Beto O'Rourke saying he was going to come take all the AR-15s.
Yeah. And then what could happen too is that it maybe doesn't happen all throughout the country, but Los Angeles is a mess. San Francisco is a poop fest. Detroit is a mess. Chicago is how many murders? 7 murders and 28 shootings over the weekend. There's a lot of cities out there that could turn into, high density areas of civil unrest. Could there not be?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about this. In Chicago, everybody makes a big deal out of these mass shootings, but in Chicago, you have the equivalent death toll every weekend from one of those events. And the nasty truth of it is, if you commit a murder in the city of Chicago, the city of Chicago this year has a 9% clearance rate. That means you're 91% likely to get away with it.
Wow.
And of those people who are both shot and doing the shooting, 95% of them are black or Hispanic.
Yep.
The overrepresentation there is a huge problem, but nobody wants to talk about that because it doesn't fit within the political narrative. And they're not using AR-15s, they're using pistols.
Karl Denninger, your site is market-ticker.org. You got a lot of great stuff on you. You're a brilliant guy. I'm ashamed that I haven't had you on earlier. There have been people my wife does YouTube, and she says, get Denninger. The people have been asking to have him on. I know it's not a joke. I mean, people have been asking to have you
Thank you
on.
very much.
So and I know why. I just had this really interesting interview. It's 28, 30 minutes of wow, I didn't know that. And so Karl, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. I will link to market-ticker.org. Karl, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you very much.